G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. Today we are joined with a very special guest once again for another edition of the Player Battles. Let's go!
Just done it from nowhere. Hoisted the goal from inside the centre. Sheed from the boundary. Dusty. Round Teddy. Petrarca. Oh, wow. How good is that? The legend becomes immortal.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey. You can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy. I'm joined with Luke.
Mate, I'm excited to be here. I feel like all we do is interview celebrities is the word I'm looking for.
And I'm here with Warnie.
Coach of the Warne Dawgs.
Hey!
Yeah.
2 out of 3. We're going to bring back the fractions for the podcast here.
Celebrities everywhere these days.
So 2 out of 3. Warnie, you've been very graceful enough to give us part of your time that we can go through another edition of Player Battles. Hopefully, we'll see how well you fare. Calvin obviously was on the last episode of this little series, and I don't know. You said you caught a little bit of it. How do you think the old Calvinator went?
There's only so much I can take of Calvin. I don't think we can watch a full episode of him doing anything. That's not about you guys at all. It's more about him. But no, I did get most of it, actually, to be honest. I won't tell him that. I just said, I saw you. You're a bit boring. But he did all right. He's a pretty convincing bloke. Did he have any beers under his belt?
Well, I'm not sure. He kept it under wraps. None that were visible on the podcast. we didn't check the rest of the room or anything like that. So
he could sell ice to an Eskimo, that bloke, but
yeah.
I found myself starting to debate for his side. So
hopefully you can hold your own as well here as well, Warnie. We've got for those again who haven't checked out the previous podcast with Calvin, we'll leave a link up in the corner there if you're looking on YouTube. But basically today we're going to be going through some player battles. We've picked players that are very close in price, position, and potential scoring outcome. And again, if you have to choose one of them, which one are you going to go for? Because, it's getting down to the wire at the moment. Fantasy AFL Fantasy is coming up soon. The season's about to start, so we've got to start to be really ruthless and cut some players that we might want to fit in our teams, but of course, budget restrictions might prevent that from happening. So we'll throw it over to you, Warnie, first. We've got our first debate in the defenders, and a very hot debate, I think, in the AFL Fantasy community between Nick Daicos, the popular man, and Hayden Young. You're going to be debating for Nick Daicos. So sell us on the second year pie.
Well, Team Vanilla is what Warne Dawgs is always about to start with. So you've actually got plenty of mates in the same boat with you, because he's currently in 46% of teams. So he's actually the most selected sort of premium player. And I guess we're selecting him thinking that he is going to be that premium player and be a top 6 defender. So you wouldn't be starting with him otherwise. So price at that 88, I think that's obviously a pretty high price point after a player in their first year, because we did see an epic first season with the numbers that he pumped out. It was pretty exciting, really, when you're thinking about watching a guy in their first year. 7 tons he had. He had a ton on debut. Like, that doesn't happen very often either, unless you're Nick Martin from the Bollers with that 130, which I'll always hang my hat on, thinking how good he was. But yeah, Daicos, he finished well in the season. I think that's probably the key to it in that role, which is most likely going to go on. Although I'm changing my mind a little bit, thinking he's going to be that half back all the time, because just some of the words coming out, like we spoke to Tom Mitchell the other day, and he was very much hinting at that even this year he'll probably get that midfield time. But, I think he will mostly play that half-back role because it worked well for him. And, yes, it is only his second year. So a couple of numbers that he did sort of pump out through the year were pretty good. So those tons is what it's about for him, that he's able to hit that. And the key is, I think, for defenders is that we've got the group. You've got your Doherty at the top, which is a significant jump ahead of the next group of guys. But I'm not that confident on that next group of guys. I do like a bit of Gus Brayshaw at the moment, but otherwise, a Dawson, he'll maybe be that at that 100. He's not going to. I can't see him jumping up high from that. Same goes for Sinclair. I think there's just risk in those guys in the sense of even thinking that they'll do what they'll do, let alone be improvers, which is what we want to find. Whereas at Daicos, I think I'm pretty confident that he's at least taken that 88 into the 90s, and it could be mid to high 90s based on the way that he plays. I guess the concerns, and that's not really my job here about it, but like going into bat for him. But it is that Collingwood style, and see exactly how that works. But he was still able to make it all happen last year despite that. And you can only be, well, we do hear second-year blues at times, but I think there's only improvement because everything we're seeing out of the Pies with what he's doing, he's just looking sharp. He's going to take it to that next level, which is the exciting thing about him.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned Warne Dawgs, that potential shift into the midfield. I've been reading some similar things. It's almost in a team like Collingwood with that game plan, you almost hope he stays across half back.
Yeah,
going to the midfield seems to be a bit of a death sentence in terms of fantasy.
Could we see a Jade Short kind of scenario happen with the Daicos if he's a bit more in the midfield in that Collingwood system? Obviously, with Craig Macrae there. Playing a bit of a similar kind of style. I'm not sure which one I prefer, to be honest.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a bit of a worry.
One of the things
I think it's a half-back thing for me. That's what you want him to do.
I think so too, yeah.
Because part of it too will be finding his feet in the midfield. Like, he didn't have a hell of a lot last year through the guts. So in a couple of the games where he did have some decent numbers in the midfield, like centre bounce attendances, he didn't drop great scores. So that is a concern there with that. So it'd probably be interesting to really watch these pracky matches coming up to see exactly what his role will be, because if it is getting increased midfield time, then that could be that little bit of an issue for him.
Yeah, I think where I'm going to go and fight for Hayden Young here is I feel like Daicos is the flashier type of player, and you're right. It's sort of like that defensive line is very difficult for us to kind of find players of value, and I feel like typically that price point around the Hayden Young, around the Nick Daicos is where we want to kind of get that player that's just a little bit below the top six. They present a little bit of value, but could potentially be in that top six. And I think that because of how well he played last year, we're all very excited that this guy is going to take that next step up. And I think he'll be better. I think he, like you said, it probably will be in the 90s, but for him to get into that top six, it's going to have to be sort of high 90s, in my opinion. And especially to start the year, I think that he's got a bit of a tough draw. He's got Geelong in round 1, Port Adelaide in round 2, both tough games for defenders and midfielders. Richmond in round 3, probably an easier draw, but then he goes against the Lions, St Kilda. Who knows if they're using a tag this year with Ross the Boss. Essendon was tagging towards the end of last year. Adelaide's an easy matchup, and then he's got Sydney, where they've been doing the Clark tag towards the end of last year as well. So to me, I can see potentially 3 tags in the first 8 rounds, and the first 2 matches against Port Adelaide and Geelong. Pretty tough matchups. So, and especially a guy coming to his second year, there's going to be a lot more attention on him.
Yeah.
There's potential for me to see him start the season poorly and have like a bit of a rough patch. I expect him to maybe get better as the season goes on, and I think overall his season average might be sort of up there. But I think that it might be a up and down start, and when you're 46% owned or whatever it is, there's a decent chance for me to go against a player like that. And I don't necessarily think like a Nick Daicos is a guy that I'm scared to go against in the way that he's going to take your season away. Like, I'm not going against Josh Dunkley because he can totally ruin your season before it gets going. But a Nick Daicos, I think there's more upside to fading him than there is upside to downside to starting him, if that makes sense. So when I compare him to like a Hayden Young, for example, this guy to me is just Mr. Consistent. Like the guy, there was 2 games against the Eagles last year where he dropped some pretty stinking scores, but I think one of those games was when they had all their waffle players in there, and the ball just lived at the other end of the field. And I think the other one, I can't remember exactly what happens. But this guy, in terms of ceiling, pretty close. He's had a 132, a 122, and a 119 in there. So he has a ceiling in there. He didn't take nearly any of the kick-ins last year. That was very much Luke Ryan's role last year. I expect that distribution to be a little bit closer this year.
I saw a tweet that perhaps he's going to be kicking in a bit more.
Yeah, so I think, and he's a young player too, hasn't played 50 games just yet, so still lots of growth left to go in him. The chip mark game that Freo likes to play, I think, suits him well. So yeah, I think that a Hayden Young is a good alternative to a Nick Daicos, and playing that sort of game where you sort of take on a popular player, I think is a legit strategy.
So Warnie, do you reckon that extra attention for Daicos, does that worry you at all?
It does, definitely. And that's probably even the difference with these guys is there's the attention, but then there's just that ceiling that we might be able to see from Daicos. Like you've got to weigh up those things a little bit along the way. I think Young is still obviously growing as a player. That kick-in stuff's good, and we spoke to Nathan Schmook over there, and they talk about him being a guy that they want the ball in his hands, and I think that's a real positive about Hayden Young. But it's a really tough one because they've got a pretty decent backline where the ball does.
There's a few players there.
I guess
in Freo.
There's a few players like Luke Ryan, for example. Like he wants the ball in his hands. I don't know if he's the best player to have it all the time, but he could be one of those guys that does take ball away from him. And there is that sort of sporadic thing. Depends on where he sort of lines up, because if he does push up on the wing, we can see some players get lost on a wing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he's a jet, and both of them are going to be great. I guess a good question here, and it is obviously about Classic and this single season. Who do you think will have the better average in their future, like over, let's say, in the next 5 years? Who does average the most?
I think Daicos gets him in the future, but it's just the start of this season that has me concerned.
The thing for me with Daicos is that bodes well for Daicos is just from a football perspective. If you've got a player of the calibre of Daicos and you're at Collingwood, you're just not letting him get tagged out of a game. Do you know what I mean? If the tag goes to him, is Fly Macrae sitting up there in the box just going, yeah, that's all good? Like, there's just no chance. He's moving him around. The other Collingwood players are working to get him the ball, working to get him open, all those things. So for me, I see the upside, and I also see that fact that he's what they're going to build around for the next decade. So they're not just going to let him go missing in games. I think that kind of bodes well for him as well.
He's got some good units in the back line with him to help him as well, I suppose, when you're looking at the Maynard types, and then just the leadership they've got back there too. So, because I'm assuming Pendles will spend a bit more time.
Does that hurt or help him, do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. It probably depends on how selfish Pendles will end up being this season. That's going to be part of that, I think. But I think it's going to help for development, but for fantasy scores, it may not exactly be what we want. But I do feel like that his numbers, like we all know his junior numbers, they were epic and all that. Like there's just, you're sort of betting against a little bit of that second year blues type thing in this, which is something that is a concern. But I still think he just will find the ball, and that's what at the end of the day, what it's all about.
Yeah, I kind of, just to wrap up this one, and we'll move on to the next one, but I just kind of compare him to almost like a Sam Walsh type. Sam Walsh came out in year one and blew us away. I think he scored, I've got on here, he scored a 92 in his rookie season, so even better than a Nick Daicos, but obviously in the midfield role. But in his second year, he improved it to a 96, but the first half of the season was much poorer than the second half of the season. He started the year with a 65, 69, 49, 90. Now, these are all Corona Ball scores, so times that by 1.25, 44. So only 1 ton in that sort of first 6 games. And then in the back half of the year, once he got used to that bit more of attention, then he started to really turn it on. And I can kind of see that trajectory for Nick Daicos. So, look, I'm not ruling out starting him, but it's something that I'm definitely considering, and I think it's the popular move to go and grab a guy that's 46% owned and just sort of tuck him away and whatever, but I think fading him is a legit strategy that I'm definitely considering.
Yeah. It's safe to go with him.
So would you...
Sorry, Warnie, you go.
Yeah, it's safe to go with him. Would you go with... So then, if you're not going there, how confident would you be of going with Young then as a starting pick?
I'm very confident with Hayden Young. I think just the natural progression of him, last year was his only full season basically playing. I think he played 5 games and then 8 games, and then last year was his first season where he played every game. So I think he's only played 10 more games than a Daicos when you add it all up. It's he's still very young in his career. I think the key thing that I want to watch in the preseason is how, like you said, how hungry is he for the football? Like Daicos is that kind of type where you see him waving his arms around, he's kicking at me, whereas Hayden Young is a bit more like polite in that way. Like he doesn't, yeah.
Wow.
Whereas
I'm sure he wouldn't like being described like
well,
that.
if I see him like saying, "Guys, give me the ball," and like show a bit of that hunger a bit more, then I will jump on. No doubts about it. Look, there's a world you could go both, especially with the defenders and all our mid prices falling over, like a Christian Saleb. But if you had to choose one at this stage, I am sort of leaning more towards Hayden Young.
Interesting. Well, pre-season watch on him. When someone's having a set shot, we want to watch where he lines up. If he gets right back to that post and is ready for that kick in, that's where he does get
we want
the
that
nod
Jake
from there, I
Lloyd,
reckon.
Sicily kind of just sprint to the goal square. That's what I want to see.
I hope he's literally leaning over the ball bag.
Yeah.
Back there.
Exactly.
Let's move on into the midfield here. The next battle we're going to do is our Jackson Macrae versus Bailey Smith. So 2 Bulldogs. Again, Warnie, we've given you the more vanilla pick here. So you're batting for Jackson Macrae, and Luke's going to be battling for our boy, probably our poster boy for this podcast, Bailey Smith.
The Moulet.
So, let us know what your thoughts are with Jack Macrae.
Vanilla. But he hasn't left my side this whole preseason. I'm just so excited about what he can do because we've seen it before. And I think that's the key thing for Macrae and the old school mentality of my fantasy picking is that you look for that upside based on someone that's been there rather than like choosing a breakout is the other side of it. I'm like going, this guy has done that. So he's priced at the 103, which is actually below his career average. So that's like a first little tick because his career average is a 104 now. His second year, he averaged 104. Like it's a pretty epic career stat to look across and see what he's done across his time. His best was in 2018 where he averaged 122. So that was obviously an epic return there. But in the last 4 years prior to last year, so he was 110 plus in all those 4 years. So if you're getting a bloke that's priced at 103 that's gone 110 in the 4 years prior to last year, you've got to be thinking, that's you could even put that as your base score, the 110 that he can go to, which would then slot him into a top 8. The other side of it is that then we've got Dunkley gone, and so things should hopefully work in his favour and all that. So his issues were when, as Calvin likes to put it, Sook's out on the wing when he gets sent out
Head
there
tilt,
to do things.
Yeah,
so
you guys had the protractor out just measuring the angle of the head.
And that's going to be a good pre-season watch for Macrae as well, I reckon. We'll see where he is. There's even some bloody funny people out there on Twitter and stuff with
saw that photo.
He was there was a photo and he was next to Bevo, so that's going to be a positive thing. Sucking
He's
up
out
to
in the wing
coach.
on the photo, I think I heard someone say.
But he was out on the side, So we did get the protractor out and it was less than 8%, so we were happy with that, and he should be pretty right with that. So I think the big positives about it is that he's still prime age. Bulldogs will be, wanting to compete as they do, although I'm not as bullish on what they might do as what others could be. However, he's going to be in the guts. And I think one of the things is probably is a little bit blown out of proportion with how much time he did spend out on the wing or outside of the midfield.
Because he was
the man. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's just going to be that there will be the more time. And then obviously the more opportunity for ball. And I think that's where it comes from for the CBAs and such, and the Dunkley going. That's 100 points going out of the team. Like they're going to be spread in a way, and I don't think that 23rd player coming in to replace him is going to be picking up those points essentially. So it's going to be a bit more of hopefully an addition to those guys in the midfield, including maybe Baslenka.
Yes, we'll see. And
Luke.
For full transparency, there's even a scenario where I could start with both of these guys in my team. But for the sake of argument, I'm going to talk about.
Could you have 3 Bulldogs as well? Maybe.
That might be going a bit.
I don't know. I don't know how I'd feel. It'd feel a bit dirty, wouldn't it?
I think they're all valuable, to be honest.
They've all got upside. That's the thing.
Now, in my opinion, to be perfectly honest, I think that this debate is just basically a debate of the CBAs. I think that both of these guys will score well. It's just where those CBAs from Dunkley go. So like you kind of mentioned before, Warne Dawgs, Macrae actually still was the predominant Bulldogs mid in terms of CBA. So he went at 64% last year, and 64% resulted in an average of about 105. Previous to that, in the last couple of years, and then years preceding that, when he had his big scores, he was more sort of the mid 70s, getting closer to 80 CBAs. So for me, just if I kind of really boil down to it, I think Macrae's a guy that needs high CBAs to score. He's not. I think we've worked out he's not going to score out on the wing. He's not going. He rarely plays half forward, but if he's there, he's not going to score. He needs those CBAs to be scoring. Now, I think that there's something to the fact that Dunkley leaves that everyone's CBAs sort of increase. But if I have a look at the Bulldogs CBAs and have a look at some of these big names, so Macrae 64%. And then you drop down. So Liberatore, just under 60%, Bont 58%, and then Bailey Smith and Josh Dunkley last year were around that 50%. So if I'm looking at Macrae and Smith, if I'm Beveridge, the one that I'm going to drastically increase those CBAs of is probably Bailey Smith and Bontempelli. So that kind of ticked up a little red flag for me, and I thought, well, is there a scenario there where Macrae stays at around 64% and then Bontempelli and Smith just kind of join him on 64% and nobody goes into that 70%?
Caleb Daniel, they're also talking about.
Yeah, we've seen tweets of him getting around. So do you think that's a scenario, Warne Dawg, where they kind of just lift Smith and Bontempelli up to that 64% and Macrae doesn't really get that lift, or...?
Yeah, I do think that's the thing, because I think your first picked in the guts, though, is Liberatore. So I'm even surprised that his numbers were as low as what they really were, considering... considering the eye test on him. Yeah.
To build on Libba's stats, just to support your point, Warnie, in the last 10 games of the season, Libba actually averaged around 70% CBA, so it was the start of the season that hurt him. But sorry, keep going.
Yeah, so I think that is definitely a scenario. I think some of this preseason talk, though, like around a small potato there, getting some midfield time there in Caleb Daniel. But, you hear that stuff. There's going to be... Is he more of a winger? Like, I don't see him totally as an inside midfielder or anything like that. And a little bit like the Toby McLean that we'd all like in our forward line. Like, he's only going to be a winger. He's not going to... He might get a little bit of inside time, but I think that's where you see a guy like that pushing there when the midfield really is, including the wings, when we hear about that sometimes in the media and coming out of clubs. But going there with those CBAs, it's an important part. But I still think that Macrae, if he boosts that up to a 70 from that mid-60s, because they just rotated through. And I guess the concern for me going into bat for Macrae is just that start that we saw from Baslenka. Like, that was a huge start to the season where his numbers were astronomical going through at the start of the year.
118 in his first 9 games.
Yeah, but then it fell away. But there's plenty of reasons and excuses for that. So obviously there's a suspension and a double suspension, really. The sniffy sniff and the and then the heady headbutt.
I think if we were talking about an off-season selection, I think he'd be first picked, wouldn't he?
Yeah, well, he'd be right up there.
It seems like he doesn't mind the off-field stuff.
Players trip, I reckon. He'd be very good on the trip at the end of the season. But yeah, I think I like Smith as well a lot, because I think there's a lot of stories you could tell for him to be better. I think the difference is, for me, is just because Macrae's been there and things get better for him. I think that's the thing. Whereas Baslenka, the range of outcomes for Bailey Smith might be greater than what they are for Macrae. Is what I sort of feel like. I would not be surprised if Bailey Smith averaged 120 this year, but I wouldn't be equally surprised if he was 100, for example. So I think they're going to be pretty tight at the end of the season of what they do. And as I said, like, adding Bont into the mix there, if we were doing a 3-way of this, I reckon those 3, you could nearly throw that blanket over what their season could end up being.
It could define a lot of people's seasons on which Bulldog you go with. Like, it could, honestly, I think you could go a number of different directions, and it could change in different portions of the season. Like, Bailey
and Macrae's cheaper as well. Like, that's an amazing thing to think about. Like, that's a thing. For a guy that I'm. Yeah,
he averaged less than Bailey Smith last year. Like, that's just the fact. And obviously Bailey Smith had that poor finish to the year, but that hot start. It just excites me to go with a player that could do that. And, he's 22 years old, getting better. Like, I know you said we're picking a breakout, but it's a breakout that we have seen the heights. It's not like it's
he's broken a bit already.
He's like a half breakout. Do you know what I mean? It's so you can sort of see what he can do. He's just got to put it together for the whole season. Yeah. So let us know what you guys think down below in the comments. The battle between the Bulldogs. We'll move on to the forward line here and finish it up again. Another teammate battle where we're going with Zach Butters versus Connor Rozee. Now, I'll kick us off here with a Zach Butters argument. He's someone that obviously frustrated a lot of fantasy managers last year. In terms of their CBAs over at Port Adelaide, he started off by getting a few of them, but sort of floated in and out of there. And I think when Connor Rozee started going in there a bit more, in the second half of the year, he sort of spent a bit more time up on the half forward kind of line. Still getting a little bit in there, but on the season averaged 38% to Connor Rozee's 50%. I think that, for me, Zach Butters is more of that kind of pure midfielder type as opposed to a Connor Rozee who's like that midfielder that pushes forward and hits the scoreboard and that kind of a thing. He's probably a more damaging player, Connor Rozee, that is. So for me, the first thing for this comparison is that if I'm an opposing team and I'm looking to tag Port Adelaide, I'm going straight to Rozee over Butters. And look, if Butters can stay healthy, he can stay and just sort of not wreck his shoulders every time he goes in for a tackle, then the talk is that they're all going to get a bump in CBAs. Those young guys are going to go in there. Boak's maybe going more to the forward line. I see maybe a higher ceiling for Butters than I do for Rozee because I think there's going to be those tags throughout the season that just sort of dampen his average compared to a player like Butters. But what are your thoughts on both the Port Adelaide boys?
Yeah, well, I like them both, actually, and I'm probably warming to Butters a little bit more over the last few weeks compared to Rozee, and that might be a little bit of a contrarian thing because of the popularity of Rozee. And you've got me on the side of all these popular dudes, and there's a good reason for it. I think that's the thing. I'm vanilla. I like to go with that because I think the game is really a trading game at the end of the day of where you get through. As long as you're feeling like these guys are going to perform how you would expect them to. You can win the competition by having some of these out-of-the-box picks that have the upside and with what they can do, because Butters could do that. I think the issue for Butters for me was that just that the centre bounces that he ended up having in the back end of the season, that's going to be a bit of a drama there. Yes, he had injuries, so I took out the injury ones like Calvin would do anyway to take out a number along the way, but pretty much I think the thing for me is that for Rozee, he started slower and then built into his season. So he went with 50% CBAs for the year. So pre-buy, he was 38%, and then post-buy, he was 62%. And that's where we did see the numbers. And the both basic price the same, 88 for Rozee, 86 for Butters. And then I think the other way is there just that Rozee, 110 in his last 7. Butters is still pretty good though, in the back part of the season, taking out that injury score along the way. But I think the key is that Rozee in that midfield role where he was getting more CBAs was working. Butters, I'm assuming, will increase from what he did in the back half of the season because he was probably battling that injury a little bit along the way. But anyway, that's my semi thing at the moment. I've just gone Rozee just because of the way he finished the year, and I think that's what role should continue because the thing is I feel like they're going to pick him in there first. Yes, he's versatile as what was mentioned there, but the Horne-Francis inclusion, he's not really going to do anything other than midfield. And so I feel like with a Butters and Rozee, they might be that little bit of a switcheroo at times with what they do there. So it's going to be interesting to see how they mix up. And that might be the concern with picking either of them because it is you've got a new body in there and you might just say it's a Boak out, Horne-Francis in type thing. But I reckon it might be something that we do have to think about. But every little bit of all the comms are coming out that Rozee is going to continue to do what he did in the back half of the season. So fingers crossed.
And
he's the
again,
man.
I think it's another opportunity where you could definitely pick both. It's sort of a structure thing, like how many forwards can you fit in there. I was starting the season with 4 premium forwards. I think I'm shifting more to that 3 kind of premium forward structure at the moment. So this is a decision that I think, end up having to make. I don't think either of them, well, again, permeating health, but I don't think either of them will wreck your season, if that makes sense. But I think that it's just about picking the best option. So I think Rozee is the safer option, and by no means a bad pick. I think there's probably 8 to 10 points at least of upside there. And they're both very similarly priced. I think that maybe if you wanted to go a bit more bolder, if you wanted to go a bit more of an aggressive sort of take on the game a bit more, I do think that Butters has a higher ceiling, but maybe a lower floor. And with his ownership, it's kind of like a style of play kind of a choice. If you wanted to, and I kind of agree with you, there's nothing wrong with a vanilla starting team. I don't think you really should take ownership into consideration too much and go against someone just for the case of going against them. But I think for both of these guys, it's about how aggressive do you want to play the starting team, and what sort of upside do you see for both of these boys there. So that'll do it for our player debates here, guys. Let us know down in the comments, how do you think, do we convince you for Rozee? Do we convince you for Butters or any of those other boys that we went through today? Thanks so much, Warnie, for jumping on. What have you guys, I know you guys have got a few things going on. A lot of our audience would already be listening to you guys, but what's coming down the pipeline? What's happening over at the Traders at the moment, man?
Plenty of podcasts, which is good fun, and we might have some special guests coming up on those over the coming week or so. But we've got lots of fun stuff along the way there, because we're ticking down the days to round 1. So the content will ramp up, especially when we see these pracky games coming up too. I think that's where hopefully we'll get some pretty good intel as we go. But if you're in Adelaide, come along and have an afternoon on the piss with us. Yeah. She'll be a good fun afternoon. So big afternoon session, talking some fantasy footy with a couple hundred people. She'll be bloody great at the highway.
I'll have to get you boys out to Brisbane one of these days. It's maybe when it's a bit cooler though. It's a bit.
We always wanted to do Brisbane. One of our mates was an assistant coach up there with the Lions, and we always go, we need to do that, but we didn't. Now he's gone down to Hawthorn, so that's going to be easier for us to see him. But Brisbane's nice and easy to get to. We do have the direct flight from Warnie, and we've done that one after work on a Friday before to get up there. But yeah, Brisbane would be good to go and do that and have at least 2 people there to talk to, I reckon.
We got a couple of mates as well. We'll bring along. Fill the crowd.
Yeah, they mightn't give a shit about footy, but anyway, that's all good. We'll I don't know. Lots of things popping up. So AFL.com.au/fantasy is an easy place to go.
Did I see that was coming?
I'm hoping that should be in the next week or so.
Okay,
look out for it. Our once draft opens, we'll be straight into that and doing our mock draft for that. We've got a few of our mates and special guests in for that one, and then I think that's how long it'll take the designers just to finish that off, and then we'll get that out as soon as possible, because I know people are really keen to draft already. I always like to leave it to the last possible moment. As we know, with any fantasy sports, there's a lot of shit that can happen in between.
Thyroid issues, anything could pop up. Glandular fever, you never know.
We're doing our mates one a week before we normally would actually this year, and so it's going to be while that practice match weekend's on.
Right,
so we'll actually be drafting when games are on. Yeah, and that's something I've done before. We've sat there and we've drafted while the game's been on, and old mate's just picked up a couple of kicks in a couple of minutes, and he's probably never going to be drafted, and then he probably gets taken at pick 50 or something. It's bloody ridiculous. So anyway, it's lots of cool things to go, and hopefully everyone's all on board and ready to go for a big season, because I think it's going to be one of the most interesting and challenging seasons this year, because I don't think there's any. We don't have a lot in AFL Fantasy of the gimme picks, I don't think. I reckon every single person that you've got in your squad right now has a for and against. There might be more fors for them, but there's definitely some against there that you could be going, I could find another option. So it's going to make it a very interesting season, I think, all around.
Yeah, very excited for footy to come back onto our radar. I'm excited for draft to open as well. Again, coming from a fantasy basketball background, we'll definitely look at getting a bit of content out there for the boys, who are keen our audience are keen on some draft content. But again, Warnie, thank you so much for all of your time, mate. And we'll catch you. Oh, Luke, you want to say something?
Yeah, mate. Just before you go, I said the same thing to Calvinator, but we do really appreciate the time that you make for us. Us startups, I guess you could call us, but you're really, really generous and approachable, and no, we appreciate what you guys do for the fantasy community. So thank you very much, mate.
Good fun. We love doing it, and we love you blokes have made an awesome start. It's been very exciting to see what you're doing. You're good at what you do. You're already giving a lot better advice than Calvin along the way too. So that's a positive thing, and you don't come across like a piss drunk cock at times, so that's a good thing.
We'll make sure
Monday mornings.
We'll make sure that we snip that content, that little clip there, and we'll blast it over on the Twitter there.
Those Monday mornings we have to deal with Calvin sometimes. He smells like a brewery, and anyway, so if you do want to fly down to Lonnie on a Monday morning, we'd certainly have you on board.
Luckily, you came in after Calvin on this one, and he's not going to have to follow you. Yeah. All right, but thank you so much, guys. If you have enjoyed the content today, make sure you guys like and subscribe on the YouTube channel. We're trying to hit 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel, so if you haven't subscribed already, please do so now. Give this video a big thumbs up. Follow us on Twitter, Ball Boys Fantasy, Luke Rojo 17 at Warnie DT, and we will catch you guys next time. Laters.